Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, Capital Markets Analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're going to take a look at a headset report that asks about how much Payday affects cannabis sales. Some of the key takeaways from this report is that sales growth is significantly higher during rent week and significantly lower all other weeks except for Alberta and California. There's an uptick in sales driven mostly by volume with a higher average number of transactions and a higher number of units sold. While overall sales are noticeably different between rent week and normal weeks, prices are not. They're higher on average, but only by a few cents. So on the other side of the same coin, discounts don't seem to be a major motivator for consumers during rent week. The same is true of basket size, meaning that people are coming in more and buying more things, not spending more. Price sensitivity applies as normal. Similarly, there's no real difference in what people buy. There's a possible trend away from buying wellness-adjacent products at the end of the month, but the overall product mix is essentially the same as other weeks. And demographically, rent week affects all generations except Gen Z, which may have something to do with how normalized cannabis is for that generation. So plotting the 2019 sales by week, it reveals a regular spike during, you guessed it, the rent week. So nearly without fail, sales peak at the end of the month and then drop to the baseline or even below baseline levels. So they found that growth is often negative in weeks beside rent, meaning that a given month's sales numbers are essentially carried by rent week. This should be some comfort to store owners who stress about slow sales earlier in the month. So Headset drills further down into the rent week effects, see how it affects growth. They see significant differences in average growth across the states, California and Alberta. They don't see any negative effects during the other weeks of the month, but you see it in Washington, Nevada, Colorado. Washington has the worst average shrinkage, although it's offset slightly by higher rent weeks than other states. California's relative immunity to a regular week shrinkage may be due to the fact that it's a relatively new market. Interest should be growing steadily for some time to come. Certainly true for Alberta. So what does rent week sales increase look like day by day? Turns out that it's driven more by increased sales volume than by increased transactions, although both play a role. So the toppling sales increase of 5.8% is driven by a 6.3% increase in units sold and a 5% increase in total transactions. So it suggests that the sales bonus is driven partly by people who don't normally shop and partly by people who splurge. So they're treating themselves probably in relation to Payday, but for different reasons. Do discounts do anything? So some sales events are entirely discount driven, like 420, but rent week is not. So the average item price drops to a mere 9 cents. So these numbers suggest that consumers don't need to be introduced to spend more towards the end of the month. Excluding discounts, you can conclude that some other motivation is involved. Across categories, everything's pretty flat, pretty even for the most part. And surprisingly, the age group is somewhat constant as well. And concluding rent week will, for the time being, continue to be big, but will do so likely without much concerted effort on the part of cannabis businesses, besides making sure they've got enough of the right product in stock. So it appears to be a good time to hype beverages, which fits the narrative of people having more disposable income after their bills have been paid. Either way, Headset thinks that rent week effects will continue independently of any discounts, as they don't seem to make much of a difference. It appears to be more driven by the way we've structured our pay schedules and rent collection than a race to cash in on promotions. That said, because of the phenomenon is driven by increased volume, watching stock levels towards the end of the month will be an important part of the successful cannabis retailing going forward. The only thing that could change the dynamic is if Gen Z's apparent immunity to the end of the month purchasing fever proves to be an enduring one. If cannabis is indeed so commonplace to members of Gen Z that they treat it like a household staple, not an end-of-the-month luxury, then rent week could mean a lot less going forward. But if that's the case, it's not necessarily bad news. Given how enthusiastic Gen Z is about cannabis, it would likely mean more sales overall, just spread over the entire month. So you can see that the week-over-week sales growth does kind of go up a little bit, ticks up after the first of the month when people, or towards the end of the month when people get paid. All in all, seems like people are fairly unaffected by being paid in rent. I don't really see 6% as a giant increase in sales, although, it doesn't surprise me that Washington is leading the pack. It is cold and miserable and rainy up here a lot of the time. They want to cash their work check and they want to go straight to the store. all in all, it looks like a fairly normalized market where people are just spending a little bit more after payday. Fairly normal. You probably treat yourself to a movie or anything, going to the bar, going to the cannabis store, whatever that is. A 5 or 6% uptake is merely just somebody spending a little bit more disposable income after payday, but not going bonanza, not going crazy. So interesting to see that it's not a big deal, which means it is normalized. If people were pulling back at the end of the month, that would be a worse indicator. So it just kind of shows that this is more of a staple, I think, in people's everyday choices, because there's not a huge change in what they're buying or who's buying or when they're buying. It's just consistent. There is a small spike of 5 to 6% when you're paid, but again, that's just kind of a normal thing to do. People have payday, they go out and get paid. So like Looney said, I got 5 on it. So first of the month, you're going to get paid. all of that. It's all normal. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.